Hello folks, Nondescript Midnight here, coming at you with a quick stream summary of my inking tips and tricks stream that I did live, I think a week ago. Oh, I can't remember. It's all a blur. Anyway, so if you want to improve your inking a little bit, or just hear my input and how I think about inking, then carry on with this video. If you want to skip the introduction, I will leave a nifty little timestamp in the bottom, because the introduction is kind of long and it mostly covers very, very basic Photoshop navigation. So it's probably not for people who have worked with the program a little bit or have some inking experience. So if you just want to see my method and my little commentary about certain areas and what I do to make my inking easier, then just go ahead and click the timestamp. Alright, enjoy! Hello everyone, Nondescript Midnight here, coming at you with a art tips and tricks tutorial, or just stuff I've learned over the years of doing art. And we're going to be focusing on digital inking today. So whatever project you're doing, you can use these skills, or you can simply, I don't know, do it for fun. And these are great skills to have for things like comic art and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite a nice set of skills. Sorry, I've just got some hot chocolate here. I suggest you get a nice beverage, because we're going to be sitting quite a while. We're going to be working on this simple sketch that I drew. Alright, so the first thing you might notice is this is literally just a photograph I took. You don't need, if you're going to do digital inking, you don't need a really good camera, you don't need anything like that. Literally your iPhone 4S camera should do the job. You're not going to get your small details in like I've got over here on the hatching on the cheek, but you're definitely going to, you know, at least have something to work with. So if you don't have access to a scanner or anything like that, there are ways of getting around that, and this is definitely one of them. Okay, so before we do anything on this drawing, what we're going to do is we're going to actually save it, right? And saving is very, very important when you're working digitally, because you can sit doing a lot of different work and you can lose that work quite easily. Files can get corrupted, it can create some difficulties. So I've got a couple of folders here. This is going to go into my concept work, because it's a concept art of a project I'm busy on, and we're going to name it after the character Rig 1. Now you can choose what kind of naming protocol you want to use. I use a really basic one of 1 2 3 4 5 blah blah blah. So it's very, very important, is to make sure that you keep saving and things like that. Secondly, you can draw with the mouse, you can draw with a tablet. I'm using a Cintiq. These things are not limited to, I mean, you can basically draw with anything, so don't get discouraged if you don't have all the full tools and stuff. Right, so what I've done here is I've just unlocked this layer, which is our layer that we've got our drawing on. We're going to set the opacity down. Now, I do want to talk quickly, actually before I do that, I do want to talk quickly about communication. So if you are drawing, if you are doing the penciling, or if somebody else is doing the penciling, or anything like that, you want to make sure that you understand what you're trying to go for when you're inking. So what I mean by this is that when you ink, there is a certain way that your lines and pencils will translate into inking. And there are very, very handy tips and tricks for making sure that you remember or know exactly what the pencil artist was going for, or what you were going for. So what I mean by this is, if I'm going to pull up an old drawing I did here, one of my favorites, what I mean by this is that there's definite instructions that you can leave based on how you pencil something. So if you look at art like what Jim Lee does, or Joe Mad, or Liefeld even, they all have a very specific style of telling the ink artist what they want out of the inking. And we do this in a couple of ways. First of all, we can leave comments, so you can leave, like, write a little note like dark area in my terrible handwriting, or just any little notes on certain areas. Or if you know the artist well enough, you can communicate via your hatching. So you see the way I've hatched these lines over here, that tells me a very specific type of darkness that I want for that area, or lightness, because you can see that it's going to have a slight shadow from where the light source is coming from. So that little bit of information is enough to avert confusion when you're drawing. So what I mean by using hatching and line work to tell a story is, I'm just going to pull up an image here, and I think we can see if I can remember how to do this correctly. That's not how you do it. I think it's, you hit the Windows key and then, no, that's not how you do it. Oh well, we'll go without. We'll just do without it. Okay, so we've got my pencil sketch here, and so what I've done to indicate to myself what sort of levels to use in each area is I've shaded them in a very specific way. So you'll see these areas that I actually want to be black. I haven't gone in and hardcore grinded them to black with like a 9B pencil. What I've done is I've just taken some very simple lines and made them straight lines to just indicate to me where I want the black to be. And you know, with line art and inking and stuff, people often think it's just tracing. No, you've also got to bear in mind the style of the artist you're inking for, or the style you're going for specifically. So always try to set up, if you're penciling, a form of communication with the artist who's going to be doing your inking. Okay, so I'm just going to put these two side by side. Hopefully they look alright together. Right, so what I meant by the dark areas is, you can see where I've done the simple straight line shading work. I've gone in on this drawing and I've made them, oh, that's useful. Okay, we can actually compare like that, but how do I zoom in? Ah, here we go. I'm not familiar with this simple image tool I'm using. I must get a better one. Okay, so you can see we've actually gone in with a pure black on those bobbly areas surrounding the sun, right? And that's simply because I was able, and this drawing, like, I think I took like a 2-3 week break between doing the pencils and doing the inking, because I work quite slowly. So in order to remind myself what kind of values I wanted in those areas, I penciled them in a very specific way. So you can see I now understand that this area is a pure white area, right? This is, or a pure glowing area, because of the way I've set up my penciling. And then these areas are dark areas. And as you can see, I added my own bit of flair to it. As an digital inker, you're more than welcome to do that. And in fact, it's encouraged, because when multiple people work on an artwork, it can really pop and turn out fantastic. So yeah, those are some basic communication skills. You can write this kind of hatching means it's black, this kind of hatching means this level, or you can simply just get to know the artist you're working with a little bit better. So that's my tips on communicating what you want out of your inks. The second thing to remember with inking is you're always going to have a much harsher line unless you set it up in some other way. There's several different lines you can try and emulate. The first is your hard black line. Okay, I'm just going to go through some basic ones. The other thing you can do is you can set up a transfer on your pen pressure, and you can gradually build up your line work until you're happy with a certain area, or how that area is coming out, you know, and just set it up, you know, so that you can really build up. I'm doing a really bad job at drawing an eye here. That you can really set it up to do whatever kind of work you're trying to accomplish. And this sort of technique is quite useful when you're drawing on my... Oh, that's another thing you got to be careful of. Don't draw on your I didn't lock the layer before I started talking. Sorry, I'm still getting used to it. So we're going to lock this, and we're just going to leave that there because it's not covering our line work, and that's fine. Okay, so you always want to lock the layer that you're going to be tracing over, or inking over is the better word. It's not truly tracing. It's adding your own flair and your own digital style to something. Right, so what the lighter version of doing this, what dealing with the opacity is going to do, is give you a sort of more pencil-y, inky look. So I'm going to pull up a drawing, and this is quite useful if you want to save artwork, right? If you did some pencils but you broke the paper or did something horrible and it just didn't look great or didn't work out. So having so I'll show you an example here actually. Let me just drag it into Photoshop. I'm much more comfortable in Photoshop. So here, what happened with this is that I started off with my basic shape, and then I got a fantastic looking pencil result. But then when I went in to start hard penciling and start adding some more value to the drawing, I ended up damaging the paper. And that meant that the drawing, if I hadn't taken a picture of it, it meant that I would have lost that drawing. But as we can see, with the lighter opacity transparent lines, I've been able to get that slight pencil effect, and you can actually play with noise and angle jitter and all sorts of other things to give it an even more pencily feel. But I'm quite happy with how this one turned out. So there, you've got your idea. So you can start off with your drawing and your pencil drawing, and as long as you're taking incremental pictures of your art, you're being safe. And that's the use of digital, is that you can salvage things that would be otherwise lost. So yeah, it all depends on the design, the project, or whatever you're doing. So yeah, that's one sort of line. So a really important note that I'm going to stipulate here is that you definitely, I'm just going to check my pen pressure still. Yeah. So when you're inking or doing anything like that, Photoshop has this very strange habit of setting your spacing to 25% on presets. You need to make yourself a preset where the spacing is 1%. And the reason for this, I'll show you now, is if we zoom in here, right, and I've got my spacing set to something like, even 20%, you're going to start seeing, usually we can zoom in and see. It's not doing it now, which is annoying. Okay, but anyway, what I want to try to explain is that the spacing is going to create its own sort of inconsistencies in your line work. Like, that's a more extreme example, but you don't want those inconsistencies. And a good example of line work that became inconsistent because I forgot to set up my brush correctly, I just need to find it. Right, so if you look at this, this is what happens. This both what happens when you don't set your DPI correctly, and also when you don't get the spacing right. So you see how we're getting that jagged edge over there, and you can actually see if you observe where that jaggedness is translating. Like even over here on this edge, it's very raggedy and doesn't look quite nice. And it's just ruining the style I was going for, this sort of very toony, neat style. So you want to be quite sure that you set all of that stuff up correctly before you start your inking. You need to have a brush that's sort of got very little spacing on it, otherwise you're going to have a hard time. There is also the hardness setting, right? Generally for inking, you're probably going to want 100%, but you can do, depending on what kind of lines you're going for. There's also there's also a bunch of other stuff we can talk about in terms of using different brushes for different effects when you're inking, and that's all, I suppose, for another video on inking tactics. So what I'm going to do here for this particular one, you can do your inking all in one layer, and that's fine. But for the effect I want to go for this drawing, which will be certain lines will be colored, so certain lines will have a certain color to them. So for example, these internal lines that I've got going over here, I want them to be sort of more skin colored. And in the hair, I want to get some of these softer strands of hair to be the color of the blonde hair I'm going to make. So I'm going to make a layer, and you should always name your layers. You don't really need to name your base layer, but let's just do it for the sake of good Photoshop hygiene. So what I'm going to do, and also you can ink in one layer and then afterwards just go in with the lasso tool and cut everything out and whatever. But I feel like just if you're going for a style where you want certain inking lines separate, it's probably much easier to just set it up when you're starting. So for the face line, I'm just going to go in on the outside of this. I actually want it to be a little bit higher opacity so I can really get a feel for those lines. That's too high. That's, I mean, come on. There we go. Yeah. Alright, so yeah, I'm quite happy with that first stroke I made. Alright, now I'm just going to summarize up most of the points I made in the video. Here I'm just talking about the pen tool quickly. You can see that you can make a neat stroke if you use the stroke feature in the pen tool, if you need to work with the mouse. One of the things I think I want to mention here, just quite briefly, is that you'll see I'm going over a line, then deleting the line, and then doing the line again. And basically what I'm trying to do there is get a nice confident stroke. You'll see I'm doing it quite a lot here. One of the key mistakes a lot of beginners make, even when doing traditional, is that your lines look a little bit wobbly. And if they have that wobbly feel, they're not going to be quite right. So you do want to make it feel sort of consistent. And the glory of digital is that you can go in and do the lines as many times as you want until you get the feel that you're going for. Here I'm also going to start talking about broken line. We'll see an example of that just now. Here, so you see there's a line there, and then I stop the line, and then there's a line on the other side. Basically, broken line is just also a way to make your drawing look a little bit more dynamic. It also acts as a way to display lighting in your line work. So when you're thinking about inking, you should also be thinking about the way the lighting would affect your line work and the way the lighting would affect the character. So when you're doing these harsh lines, it's actually quite important to remember that everything you do while you're inking also relates to light and the way light would bounce off the character. So just bear that in mind when you're doing your inking. You're also going to notice that I sometimes go on the outside of the lines and then fill in, and I tend to do that for thicker areas of line work, and I want to get a specific feel for the line, so I go on the outside of the line and trace it out and then fill it in. And that'll give me the effect I'm looking for in those areas, especially on the big areas. You'll also notice that I'm zooming out and then switching off the pencil layer just to see how the inks are looking, because sometimes something won't translate very well. You'll also notice I do these little areas where I don't actually fill in with black. I just sort of leave it as an outline of a particular detail. This is quite useful when you go in with coloring, and also when you're just leaving it as pure inking. It gives it that feeling of character for the style I'm going for. You'll notice now I make a new layer, and then I duplicate the other layer. And the reason I'm making a new layer is I want to play with some darks around the underside of the neck area and the underside of the ear, darks that were instructionally there for me when I was creating the thing. Now, the benefit to doing this is obviously that if you don't like the dark, you can simply erase it and you won't affect your line work, and it's a faster way of working. Always make incremental saves once you're finished with a certain area, or just if you've been working for a long period of time. If you want to improve your inking, a really great way to do that is to just take somebody else's pencils offline or whatever, and just really go over their line work. It'll give you a great sense of idea of how to ink certain areas and how to communicate certain things. Especially I found with noses, I did a lot of tracing of other people's artwork just to get a sense of how like the nose works and how they approach noses. And it's been very helpful in my work to sort of do that. Once again, we're seeing me doing the outside of layers and then coloring them in. Don't be afraid to rotate in Photoshop. If you've got an earlier version of Photoshop, you won't be able to use the rotate tool. You'll have to go into the image and rotate it manually, which is kind of a schlep, but rotating does really, really help. I think I just want to make a point about the nose here. When people do nostrils, they often do them in pure black. That's not right. Nostrils will still have a bit of lighting pull into them, so you're going to get some sort of idea of the internals of the nose, unless you've got really, really dark lighting or lighting from a very harsh source in the back. You're going to get that. Also, another thing that I notice artists make a mistake of, I'm just talking about the nose in general, the nostrils, you're always going to have at least, almost always going to have at least a part of both nostrils showing. Again, just doing my outline lines and then going to fill that in, give it a nice defined look, and still get that thick line work that I got in the pencils. Yeah, as you can see, I do a lot of stroke, then Control Z, stroke, then Control Z until I'm getting exactly the line I'm looking for. Also, don't be afraid to go for harsh black in certain areas. But as you can see, I decided the harsh black wasn't working there, so I just made it an outline like I did on that chin area. And that's going to be quite useful for when we go in with colors. You'll notice I spoke briefly about putting everything on separate layers. The outside of the eyes and the inside of the eyes are going to be on separate layers, and that's going to give us more control when we go in with colors. So we'll be able to alter the internal of the eye separately to the external, and that just really, really helps when you want to change the color of the line works you've got on the inside of the eye, just to have that different layer set up there. There's several different ways you can do eyebrows. I'm going for a more detailed way, but generally if you're inking in the style, cartoon sort of comic book style, you can just make pure black eyes, but I want to actually have some browns and some strokes of eyebrow hair in my colors, so I'm going in and plotting those out. You can see in the original pencils, if I was thinking a little bit more about what I wanted there, I would have probably not gone in so hard with the penciling. You can see the penciling is quite dark around those eyebrows. It's just like a standard thing that I've learned to do when penciling, so I didn't really plot it out for inking. Now we're going on the interior features of the face. Once again, these are on a different layer. I want to note here that these are gonna look quite harsh when we first zoom out. But don't fret, rather have your details in harsh and then you can go in later and lighten them up than not have them in at all. Because you still want to get the feeling that this drawing was a pencil drawing at one stage and that there was work and thought behind it. You don't want to lose your little lines when you go in and coloring. But yeah, put them on a different layer, and that means that we can adjust the opacity, and then later on we can also add color to them, so that they are both there, but also not quite as striking as they're going to be when we zoom out just now. depending on your style, outlining your highlight areas can look pretty cool. There we go. You see how I adjust the opacity and suddenly it looks a little better? Yeah, so basically put your harsh lines in there, and the inking is a pretty harsh style. Okay, now we're going to go in on the hair. A tip for hair when you're both penciling and inking is that hair has a distinct flow to it. It also obeys gravity in some ways, so like it's light yet still has a weight to it. For this particular character, his hair is completely defying gravity, so those rules don't necessarily apply, but you'll see on the little edges of the hair we've got these little flicks of hair that are not as harshly gelled. So it just gives it that feeling that it's dynamic rather than just a big clump of something. As you can see, I'm going directionally with my inking of the hair. Hair has a direction to it. As long as you sort of put strands of hair in a logical direction that the hair would flow, your hair's going to look a lot better. Really plotting out the lines I want for the hair here. Okay, now I've created a separate layer for the shadows in the hair. So I want to make these really harsh dark areas just to give that hair a little bit more dimension. But also, if it ends up looking a little bit harsh at the end of your drawing, remember inking is quite a harsh medium. So yeah, it all depends on what you want to do. You can lighten those up, or if you're wanting to go in with colors later, preferably leave them dark, because when we go in with colors, we're actually going to take those shadows and we're going to adjust the colors so that they are shadowed areas, but colored. So like there'll be dark blonde areas on this character, so they'll actually make the hair pop quite a lot once we get to the coloring stage. Here I'm going in and I'm just trying to decide exactly how I want to blend this particular area with the stubble, because our character's got quite a bit of stubble, so I was wondering, should I make some stubbly areas within the black solid area to give it that feel of stubble eating away at the hair, but I decided to go for just a harsh black at the end of the day. But you can get quite a cool effect if you try to make like a transition between the stubble and the hair. All depends on what you're going for. For my purposes, having a solid black area over there is going to work a lot better later. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and make some more hair shadows. And that's going to make the hair really pop. And yeah, basically with the darker areas of the hair, you've just got to think about where your light source is and where the hair would be dark, like what areas of hair would be hidden under other areas of hair, what areas would pop and light up and things like that. That just basically comes with practice. But you can get better at it by looking at other people's drawings and looking at hair in real life and trying to emulate what's going on there. For this particular hairstyle, it's kind of a little bit unrealistic. Nobody's hair really does the kind of things that's going on here, even with super gelled up hair. So we are just sort of, at some points, trying to be creative in how we think this hair would behave, given what kind of strength it has. And like I say, don't be scared to go in with real darks in those areas. Even if you're inking traditionally, it's not as easy, and it's very scary to just like throw black onto an area when you're inking traditionally, but as long as you're careful and you plot it out relatively well, you can get a pretty cool result. Right, now we're going to tackle the stubble. What I did here is I tried a few brushes, but they weren't exactly doing it for me, so I just went in and with a small brush and just like stubbled up an area, see how I felt about it, and then added some little bits of face fuzz on the external layer of the face. And now what I'm going to do is, since I'm happy with the stubble area, I'm just going to duplicate it and make it look heavy and stubbly, and then go in with some erasing and stuff later. A neat trick is coming up later, so if you're doing something like this where you're just copying and pasting and you want to see what's going on, just invert it to erase those areas where it's just going over. Now I'm just erasing and adding a little bit more stubble, adding a little bit more personality so it's not just copy paste. Add some more of the stubbly areas around the top upper lip area. I can't remember, orbitus or something I think it's called. And there you go.